The Retro Football League presents The Extra Point. Powered by Wolverine Studios Draft Day Sports Pro Football. It's time to take the field. What are you bringing to the table? And now, for our host, Lance McAllister.
Welcome folks to another exciting episode of The Extra Point, your go-to RFL talk show. I'm your host, Lance McAllister, and today, we're diving deep into the 1979 RFL draft. We'll be reviewing how each team fared in this crucial event. To help me break it all down, we've got our two resident experts, Graham Gibson and Bob Johnson. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lance. Always a pleasure to be here.
Happy to be here, Lance. Let's talk some football.
Excellent. Let's jump right into it. We're starting with the Atlanta Falcons. Graham, what are your thoughts on the Falcons draft this year?
Well, the Atlanta Falcons faced a challenge with only one top-round pick, but they made the most of it. In my opinion, the highlight of the draft was their selection of linebacker George Andrews in the middle of the second round. This was a brilliant move as it directly addressed a glaring need for the team, improving a struggling linebacking unit. Andrews has the potential to be an immediate starter and make a significant impact on the defense. Considering the limited resources they had, I have to give the Falcons an A for the draft performance.
High praise there, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, what's your take on the Falcons draft this year?
Well, it's clear that the Falcons were working with very few picks, and none of them in the top round. That's a tough situation for any team. Looking at the selections they did make, the choices of guard Barney Cotton and linebacker George Andrews were reasonable, but I'm not convinced they represent a substantial upgrade over the current roster. It's always challenging to find immediate impact players in the later rounds, and this draft reflects that challenge. Therefore, I have to give the Falcons a rather low grade of D, considering the limited impact I see from this year's draft class.
Graham, what's your take on the Baltimore Colts draft?
Well, the Baltimore Colts made a bold move by selecting linebacker Tom Cousineau. It's evident that Cousineau has already proven himself to be a valuable addition to the team, outperforming some of the veterans. The Colts have high hopes for this rookie, and it seems like a promising choice. However, I must express my disappointment with their second-round pick, Nesby Glasgow. His lack of speed may hinder his success as a strong safety in the RFL, and it's clear the team will need to work on developing his skills. On a positive note, the Colts made a great late pick by selecting linebacker Jim Kovach in the fourth round, who is expected to join Cousineau in starting in the linebacker unit this season. All things considered, I'd give the Colts a B for the draft performance, primarily because the second-round pick didn't quite live up to expectations.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear from Bob Johnson. Bob, what's your analysis of the Colts draft this year?
The Baltimore Colts made some decent selections in this draft. Linebacker Tom Cousineau and strong safety Nesby Glasgow are both solid players, even though they might be somewhat less than what was initially anticipated. While Cousineau looks like a good addition, there's room for growth and improvement from Glasgow, given his speed limitations. It's also worth mentioning the late pickup of linebacker Jim Kovach, which adds depth and potential to their linebacker unit. All in all, I'd rate the Colts draft as a solid C. It wasn't a home run, but they made reasonable choices that could contribute to the team's overall performance.
Graham, how do you view the Buffalo Bills draft selections this year?
Well, the Buffalo Bills came into the 1979 RFL draft with an impressive haul, boasting 6 top-round picks, including 3 in the first round. The first 2 picks, linebacker Jerry Robinson and defensive end Mark Gastineau, were absolute gems. Robinson has quickly risen to the top 25 linebackers in the league, and Gastineau is among the top 10 defensive ends. These 2 players bring game-changing potential to the Bills' defense. In addition, with their last pick in the first round, they selected Tony Nathan, who is expected to fill in a considerable gap left by the recently traded O.J. Simpson. Considering the quality and impact of these selections, I'd have to give the Bills an A+ for the draft performance. They managed to draft 2 top-tier players and addressed a significant need left by losing running back Simpson.
Impressive analysis, Graham. Now let's hear Bob Johnson's take on the Buffalo Bills draft. Bob, how do you grade the Bills draft this year?
The Buffalo Bills executed an excellent draft this year. The first-round selection of linebacker Jerry Robinson is a home run. Robinson is a big-hitting tackling machine who should make an immediate impact on the defense. Defensive end Mark Gastineau, another first-round pick, is poised to wreak havoc on opposing quarterbacks, adding a formidable presence to their defensive line. The Bills also secured a versatile talent in Tony Nathan to address their running back needs. All in all, I would give the Buffalo Bills a solid A for their draft. They've significantly strengthened their team and appear to have made shrewd, high-impact choices.
Graham, what are your thoughts on the Cincinnati Bengals draft this year?
The Cincinnati Bengals made some interesting choices in this year's draft. They addressed a position of need by selecting DB Dwayne Woodruff. While Woodruff is a solid choice, it's worth noting that it was a bit of a reach to take him this early in the round. In the second round, they secured a great run-blocking tight end with above-average receiving abilities, which is a valuable addition to the team. However, the real standout selection was the German kicker Uwe von Schaemann, who is expected to become a top kicker in the league. Overall, the Bengals did a commendable job in the later rounds, so I'd give them a grade of B+ for the draft performance.
Thank you, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you view the Bengals draft this year?
The Cincinnati Bengals made some solid choices in this year's draft. They addressed their need at cornerback by selecting Dwayne Woodruff, who is expected to start from day one. It's important to fill gaps, and they did that effectively. The selection of tight end Don Warren, who brings strong blocking skills and decent receiving abilities, adds value to the roster, even though they already have a primary tight end in Castor. And the addition of Uwe von Schaemann in the kicking game is a smart move. All in all, I'd rate the Bengals draft as a solid C. They made decent picks, but not all of them were necessarily needed, and it remains to be seen how they will impact the team.
Graham, what's your take on the Cleveland Browns draft this year?
The Cleveland Browns made a noteworthy first-round selection by picking Cody Risian, a tackle who is considered one of the top 20 in the league. Risian is a run-blocking specialist, which will undoubtedly help the Browns' ground game. However, it's worth noting that with the remainder of their picks, the Browns primarily focused on adding depth to various positions. While this approach is sensible, the overall impact may not be immediate, and it's more about building for the future. Considering this, I would give the Browns a B for the draft performance. While Risian is a great addition, the later round picks brought the grade down a bit.
Thank you, Graham. Now let's hear Bob Johnson's perspective. Bob, how do you grade the Browns draft this year?
The Cleveland Browns made a solid move by selecting Cody Risian in the first round, addressing their need for a top tackle. Risian should make an immediate impact, particularly in their run-blocking game. Additionally, wide receiver Frank Lockett shows promise in developing into a starting wide receiver, which is essential as some of the older players on the team start aging out. All in all, the Browns draft is a solid one, but it's not an outstanding or transformative one. I'd give it a grade of C, as it addresses some immediate needs while also thinking about the future.
Graham, how do you view the Denver Broncos draft this year?
The Denver Broncos made a deliberate effort to improve both their offensive and defensive lines in this year's draft. Their first-round selection of Bruce Davis, a tackle who is considered a top 20 player, was a solid move. He addresses a critical need on the offensive line. However, their second first-round pick, defensive tackle Don Smith, felt like a bit of a reach, and it remains to be seen whether he can effectively compete for the second starting defensive tackle slot. Unfortunately, the remainder of their picks don't seem to have the potential to make a significant impact or even secure a spot on the roster. The strategy was reasonable, but the draft class's overall depth seems lacking. I'd grade the Broncos draft as a C+.
Thank you, Graham. Now let's hear Bob Johnson's perspective. Bob, how do you grade the Broncos draft this year?
The Denver Broncos recognized a pressing need on both sides of the line of scrimmage and made solid picks to address it. Tackles Bruce Davis and John Giesler, while not necessarily star players, fill essential roles on the offensive line. This is a significant move for the Broncos, as offensive line depth is crucial for a successful season. Overall, I would give the Broncos draft a grade of C. They focused on areas that needed improvement and secured players who should contribute positively, though they may not be standout stars.
Graham, what are your thoughts on the Detroit Lions draft this year?
Unfortunately, the Detroit Lions draft this year appears to be quite underwhelming. Their first-round selection, defensive end Mike Bell, left much to be desired. Bell's speed and overall attributes are not what you'd typically expect from a defensive end, and it's uncertain whether he can effectively compete for the second starting spot. The remainder of their picks don't seem to have the potential to make the roster, let alone secure starting positions. As a result, I'd have to give the Lions a D for the draft performance. They failed to bring in any clear starters.
Thank you, Graham. Now let's hear from Bob Johnson. Bob, how do you view the Lions draft this year?
The Detroit Lions draft was less than stellar, but there is some potential in defensive end Mike Bell. While Bell may not be the most heralded player, he has the potential to be an impact player and contribute positively to the team's defense. Unfortunately, he's likely to be the only player making a significant impact out of this draft class for Detroit. With that in mind, I'd give the Lions a grade of C. The draft class is relatively unremarkable, with only one potential standout.
Graham, what's your take on the Green Bay Packers draft this year?
The Green Bay Packers were in a unique position with no first-round pick but a significant number of second-round selections. They faced the challenge of rebuilding a roster that needed a boost. To address this, they made a bold move by selecting 6 players in the second and third rounds who were projected to step in as starters. This includes potential starting quarterback Steve Fuller. The Packers had several needs to address, and they managed to fill multiple positions with promising talent. Considering the circumstances and the ability to address so many needs, I'd give the Packers an A+ for the draft performance.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Packers draft this year?
The Green Bay Packers draft this year may not have produced any standout stars, but it's important to note that many of the draftees are likely to see significant playing time on a team that is in dire need of fresh talent. The Packers had to address multiple areas of weakness, and they did just that. While there might not be any instant superstars, these players have the potential to contribute positively to the team. Considering their ability to fill numerous gaps, I'd grade the Packers draft as a solid C.
Graham, how do you view the Kansas City Chiefs draft this year?
The Kansas City Chiefs entered the 1979 RFL draft without a first-round pick, but they made the most of their selections in rounds 2 to 4. Their second-round pick, linebacker Joel Williams, is expected to step into a starting role this season, which is a significant achievement for a non-first-rounder. Additionally, most, if not all, of the players chosen in the top 4 rounds are likely to remain on the team and provide valuable depth. The Chiefs made some good pickups that improved their team and bolstered the depth. Overall, I'd give them a grade of B+ for the draft performance.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Chiefs draft this year?
The Kansas City Chiefs made some promising selections in this year's draft, particularly at the linebacker position. Both Joel Williams and Barry Krause have the potential to eventually make a significant impact on the defense. However, the rest of the draft class seems more likely to serve as career backups or provide depth. While it's not the most remarkable draft, it still has the potential for future success. I'd give the Chiefs a grade of C. They addressed key areas of need and secured some players with the potential to shine.
Graham, how do you view the Los Angeles Rams draft this year?
The Los Angeles Rams entered the 1979 RFL draft without a first-round pick but managed to make a notable selection in the second round. Linebacker Monty Coleman, who they picked up in round 2, is undoubtedly one of the highlights of this draft class. He may well turn out to be the steal of the draft, providing a significant boost to the defense. However, beyond Coleman, most of the Rams' other picks may struggle to find a place on the team. While Coleman is a great addition, it's not enough to warrant an exceptionally high grade. I'd rate the Rams draft as A+B+ for their ability to secure a standout player but with limited overall impact.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Rams draft this year?
The Los Angeles Rams made some solid picks in this year's draft. While they didn't have a first-round selection, they managed to find good players in the later rounds. Linebacker Monty Coleman is a valuable addition to their defense, even though linebacker was already a position of strength. Additionally, wide receiver Steve Watson, who is expected to be in the rotation of receivers, brings depth to the wide receiver core. Both players are decent picks at impact positions, but they might not get fans' hearts racing with excitement. I'd give the Rams draft a grade of C. It's a solid class with potential impact, but nothing that stands out as exceptional.
Graham, what are your thoughts on the Minnesota Vikings draft this year?
The Minnesota Vikings made some intriguing selections in the 1979 RFL draft. Their first-round pick, defensive end Jesse Baker, was a bit of a reach. Baker has issues with both strength and tackling skills, and it's clear he's a project. However, if he can improve in these areas, he has the potential to become a solid defensive end. On the other hand, their second-round pick, strong safety Vernon Perry, was an excellent choice. Perry is expected to become a top 20 player at his position. Considering the mixed quality of their selections, I'd grade the Vikings draft as a B. The reach for Baker was significant, but the addition of Vernon Perry was a great pickup.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Vikings draft this year?
The Minnesota Vikings may not have drafted superstars, but they certainly picked up above-average players at positions of critical need. Defensive end Jesse Baker, strong safety Vernon Perry, and free safety Steve Henry are all expected to be starters, which addresses significant gaps in the team. Additionally, they secured valuable special teams players in kicker Tony Franklin and punter Max Runager. Overall, the Vikings have a solid draft class that fills critical roster spots and adds quality depth. I'd give them a grade of B for their efforts.
Graham, how do you view the New England Patriots draft this year?
Unfortunately, the New England Patriots did not have a very successful draft in 1979. Their first-round selection of linebacker Gary Cobb was a significant miss. Cobb's below-average speed and intelligence make it doubtful that he'll have a significant role on the team, especially with the Patriots already boasting a strong linebacker core. He might find himself on their practice squad if he's lucky. Their second-round pick, wide receiver Jerry Butler, isn't expected to be any more of a standout. He'll have to fight to earn the fourth slot at receiver. Overall, there are no clear starters among those they drafted, and it seems like they'll have to fight to keep their jobs. I'd give the Patriots a grade of D for this underwhelming draft.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Patriots draft this year?
The New England Patriots 1979 draft may not have produced any superstars, but it's not entirely devoid of promise. There are at least two contributors from this draft class. Gary Cobb, while not living up to high expectations, will still see playing time at linebacker. Similarly, wide receiver Jerry Butler should get some playing time as the number 3 receiver. While these players may not be the stars the Patriots were hoping for, they still have potential value to the team. With that in mind, I'd give the Patriots a grade of C. It's not an exceptional draft, but it has the potential for modest contributions.
Graham, what are your thoughts on the New Orleans Saints draft this year?
The New Orleans Saints entered the 1979 RFL draft with only one pick in the top 3 rounds. However, they made the most of it by selecting a standout deep threat wide receiver, Roy Green. Green has the potential to be a playmaker and provide the kind of target that quarterback Archie Manning needs. But the real sleeper pick came in round 4 with the selection of kicker Matt Barr, who has since proven to be a top 5 kicker in the league. Considering the limited number of picks they had, the Saints made the most of the situation. I'd give them an A+ for the draft performance.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Saints draft this year?
The New Orleans Saints may not have had a wealth of picks, but they certainly maximized the impact of their selections. The addition of Roy Green as a deep threat playmaker is exactly what Archie Manning needs in his receiving corps. Additionally, the Saints added 2 top special teamers in kicker Matt Barr and punter Frank Garcia. The importance of solid special teams players cannot be overstated. The Saints managed to address key areas and enhance their special teams, all with a limited number of picks. I'd give them a grade of B for their effective draft strategy.
Graham, how do you view the New York Giants draft this year?
The New York Giants made a strong impact in the 1979 RFL draft with 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. Their first selection, Titan Kellen Winslow, is an excellent receiving tight end and a top 10 player at his position. Next, they picked up defensive tackle Fred Smirlers, who is also a top 10 player in his position. These first-round choices are impressive, and both players are expected to make significant contributions right away. However, their second-round selections may have a more challenging time securing a spot on the team. Overall, I'd grade the Giants draft as an A, primarily due to the strength of their first-round picks, though they fell short in the second.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Giants draft this year?
The New York Giants have made some remarkable selections in the 1979 draft. They picked up the best tight end in the draft, Kellen Winslow, and the best defensive tackle, Fred Smirlers. Both of these players have the potential to vie for Pro Bowl spots right out of the gate, which is an impressive achievement. While their second-round selections may not be as strong, the first-round selections alone make this draft a success. I'd grade the Giants draft as a B. The high-value players in the first round set them up for success in the upcoming season.
Graham, how do you view the New York Jets draft this year?
The New York Jets had a fantastic draft in 1979, holding 3 first-round picks. They made the most of this unique opportunity. With the second pick of the draft, they selected quarterback Phil Simms, who is a game manager with all the tools to become a franchise player. But they didn't stop there. They picked the top 2 wide receivers in the draft, Dwight Clark and Drew Hill, with their remaining first-round picks. In the 4th round, they found a gem in fullback Robert Dowling. This draft has the potential to transform the Jets and take them to a new level. I'd give them an A+ for their exceptional draft class.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Jets draft this year?
The New York Jets made a splash in the 1979 RFL draft by landing 3 top-notch offensive playmakers. First, they secured quarterback Phil Simms, who has all the tools to become a franchise player. Then, they added 2 legit playmakers in the passing game with wide receivers Drew Hill and Dwight Clark. This draft class significantly bolsters the Jets' offense. I'd give the Jets a grade of A for their excellent draft choices.
Graham, how do you view the Oakland Raiders draft this year?
The Oakland Raiders made significant strides in the 1979 RFL draft, especially with their 2 first-round picks. They started by selecting top 10 guard Max Montoya, adding a powerhouse to the offensive line. Then, they secured a solid starter in defensive end Marty Lyons to strengthen the defensive line. In the later rounds, they used their 4 picks to address some needed depth on the team. Overall, it was a solid draft that improved both the offensive and defensive lines. I'd give the Raiders an A for their impressive draft class.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Raiders draft this year?
The Oakland Raiders made some fantastic selections in the 1979 draft. Guard Max Montoya is an absolute beast on the offensive line and will bring power and protection to the team. On the defensive side, defensive end Marty Lyons is ready to make an immediate impact and enhance the Raiders' pass rush. These 2 first-round picks are solid additions to the team. I'd grade the Raiders draft as a B. They've improved both their offensive and defensive lines, but there's still room for further enhancements.
Graham, how do you view the Philadelphia Eagles draft this year?
The Philadelphia Eagles had a challenging time in the 1979 RFL draft, with their first selection coming in the 3rd round. They opted for a solid backup running back, Jerry Eckwood, with that pick. Unfortunately, they didn't have much to work with in this draft class. Given the limited opportunities and lack of high-impact picks, I'd grade the Eagles draft as a C+. There isn't a lot to write home about, but they did manage to add some depth to their roster.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Eagles draft this year?
The Philadelphia Eagles had a tough time in the 1979 draft, with limited opportunities and no early round picks. Backup running back Jerry Eckwood is likely the only contributor to come out of this draft class. While he could provide some depth to the running back position, the overall impact of this draft is quite limited. I'd give the Eagles a grade of D. It's a challenging draft year for them with little to show in terms of immediate impact players.
Graham, how do you view the Pittsburgh Steelers draft this year?
The Pittsburgh Steelers had a limited number of picks in the 1979 RFL draft, with both of them coming in the 1st round. However, they made the most of these selections. With their first pick, they chose run stuffer defensive end Dan Hampton, who is a top 10 player at his position and will be a monster on the defensive line. In the middle of the 1st round, they selected strong safety Glenn Blackwood, who is a TOP 15 strong safety and one of the best defensive backs in the draft. This draft was remarkable for the Steelers, and the 2 first-round picks were studs. I'd give them an A+ for their exceptional draft class.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Steelers draft this year?
The Pittsburgh Steelers may have had only 2 picks, but both of them are studs. Defensive end Dan Hampton is an absolute monster on the defensive line and will significantly impact the team. Similarly, strong safety Glenn Blackwood is one of the best defensive backs in the draft and will bring strength and reliability to the secondary. With such strong first-round picks, it's clear the Steelers made the most of their limited selections. I'd give the Steelers a grade of A. They've added quality and depth to their roster with these 2 picks.
Graham, how do you view the San Diego Chargers draft this year?
The San Diego Chargers had a challenging draft in 1979, with their first selection coming in the 3rd round. They opted for a solid backup running back, Ron Springs, with that pick. Unfortunately, they didn't have much to work with in this draft class, and their selections are not expected to make an immediate impact. Given the limited opportunities and lack of high-impact picks, I'd grade the Chargers draft as a C+. There isn't much to work with here, but they did manage to add some depth to their roster.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Chargers draft this year?
The San Diego Chargers made efforts to address a desperate need position in the 1979 draft by adding running backs Ron Springs and Ted Brown. However, these players are considered mediocre backs, and it's unclear whether they will significantly impact the team. The Chargers had limited opportunities in this draft, and the overall impact is expected to be quite limited. I'd give the Chargers a grade of D. While they attempted to address a need, the quality of the players selected is not expected to make a substantial difference.
Graham, how do you view the San Francisco 49ers draft this year?
The San Francisco 49ers had an intriguing 1979 draft with 2 first-round picks. The first of those, selecting Otis Anderson early in round 1, was a controversial move that raised questions. However, it turns out to be a brilliant choice, as Anderson has emerged as a top-tier running back and a great pickup for the 49ers. The next first-round pick brought defensive tackle Bob Golick, who will be a centerpiece for the defense. Additionally, their 2nd and 3rd round selections are expected to see playing time. Overall, it was an impressive draft for the 49ers, especially in the top 3 rounds. I'd grade the draft as an A.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the 49ers draft this year?
The San Francisco 49ers had an outstanding 1979 draft, adding numerous difference makers to their roster. Starting with superstar running back Otis Anderson, they acquired a player who has the potential to be a game-changer. Defensive tackle Bob Golick is another standout addition who will anchor the defensive line. They also managed to get a steal in the 2nd round with linebacker Neil Olkovich. The 49ers made quality selections that will significantly impact their team's performance. I'd give the 49ers a grade of A for their excellent draft choices.
Graham, how do you view the Seattle Seahawks draft this year?
The Seattle Seahawks used their late first-round pick to select wide receiver Ernest Gray, who is good enough to start for most teams but will likely slide into the slot spot for the Seahawks. While their first-round pick is solid and addresses a need, their remaining draft picks may struggle to make the roster. They failed to deliver in the later rounds, which impacts the overall quality of the draft class. I'd grade the Seahawks draft as AB, with a strong start but a lackluster finish.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Seahawks draft this year?
The Seattle Seahawks made some significant additions to their roster in the 1979 draft. Wide receiver Ernest Gray will start opposite Steve Largent and provide much-needed help in the passing game. Additionally, defensive end Dwayne Board is expected to start on the Seahawks' quickly aging defensive line, bringing strength and youth to the position. While their first two picks have strong starting potential, the remaining draft choices may not have as immediate an impact. I'd give the Seahawks a grade of C. They addressed key areas but have room for improvement in the later rounds.
Graham, how do you view the St. Louis Cardinals draft this year?
The St. Louis Cardinals had a phenomenal 1979 draft, starting with the first overall pick where they selected the legendary quarterback Joe Montana. Montana is a field general and is expected to be a game changer for the Cardinals. In the second round, they picked running back William Andrews to serve as a reliable backup for Walter Payton. The later rounds brought some special players, including punter Luke Priestridge, who is a top 5 punter, and a sleeper in wide receiver Ricky Watts, who will compete with the top wide receivers of this draft class. The Cardinals made excellent selections all around, and I'd grade the draft as an A+.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Cardinals draft this year?
The St. Louis Cardinals had a spectacular 1979 draft, thanks to their first overall pick, Joe Montana, who is a generational player at quarterback. Montana is expected to have a tremendous impact on the team. Additionally, they found a diamond in the rough in the 7th round with wide receiver Ricky Watts, who turns out to be the best wide receiver in the draft. The Cardinals wisely used the rest of their draft to add much-needed depth and future starters. I'd give the Cardinals a grade of A for their excellent draft choices.
Graham, how do you view the Tampa Bay Buccaneers draft this year?
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had a clear strategy in the 1979 draft to bolster their lines on both sides of the ball. Unfortunately, the depth of talent wasn't quite there to fully execute this strategy. For their first pick, they selected defensive tackle Manu Tuiasosopo, a top 10 projection who unexpectedly dropped to the middle of the first round. This was a good selection by the books and will make an already tough defensive line even better. However, their second first-round pick, defensive end Al Harris, and the remaining draft picks may struggle to make an impact and are more likely to be moved to the practice squad or dropped. Overall, I'd grade the Buccaneers draft as a C. The pickup of Tuiasosopo was a good selection, but the remaining picks may not significantly help the team move forward.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Buccaneers draft this year?
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers addressed a key area of their defense by selecting defensive tackle Manu Tuiasosopo in the first round. This move will make their already tough defensive line even better. I'd give the Buccaneers a grade of C for this draft. They've improved a crucial position, and Tuiasosopo should have a positive impact on their defense.
Graham, how do you view the Washington Redskins draft this year?
The Washington Redskins had a productive 1979 draft, starting with their first-round selection of guard Kent Hill, who is a top 10 guard. This choice will solidify their interior line, making it easier to open gaps for inside runs and improve their overall offensive line play. In the second round, they picked tight end Doug Cosby, who is an exceptional run-blocking tight end and will provide a valuable asset for their running game. The Redskins appeared to focus on the best available player and ended up with some great additions. I'd grade the draft as an A.
Thanks, Graham. Now let's hear what Bob Johnson has to say. Bob, how do you grade the Redskins draft this year?
The Washington Redskins made an excellent choice in guard Kent Hill in the first round, who is a superstar in his position. This selection will significantly improve their offensive line and make their running game more effective. However, the rest of the draft picks appear to be backups rather than impact players. While they've added depth, it's not clear if these selections will be immediate game changers. Overall, I'd give the Redskins a grade of C. Their first-round selection was outstanding, but the rest of the draft was focused on adding depth rather than star power.
Thank you, Graham and Bob, for your expert insights. It's been a fantastic discussion and we'll be back soon with more on The Extra Point. Thanks for tuning in, folks.